Hi and welcome to the Work Happy podcast. It's a special edition one this week, and I'm joined by Martin Day, who's our principal consultant at Silicon Reef. Martin's here to help us demystify what Viva is. One of the most common things we hear from our customers is, what is it? Why should I care? And is it important to me? And how do I maximize using the Viva? So Martin and I are in conversation today about how to get the most out of Viva and to clarify some of those things that you're just not sure about. Cool. So Martin, thank you for joining us today at the Work Happy podcast. We're going to be covering some topics around Viva. We've done a lot of polls recently through social, as well as speaking to lots of our customers around what is it? Because there's been a big announcement from Microsoft, obviously, over the last couple of years. And we just want to try and clear things up a little bit. Let's break it down in this session, try and talk about what the modules are, how they work with what people might already have, as well as thinking about, from an employee experience perspective, why is it relevant today? And perhaps why do we think it's more appropriate now in this hybrid world that we're entering into, which we must enter into, and how can we maximize what we're getting through what we have access to in the Viva suite? So one of the most common questions that we get from our customers is, what is it and why should I care?
So I think one thing that would be good today is just settling the uncertainty around Viva, because it's such a publicized thing at the moment that it's understanding what it is, but not being intimidated by what it is as well. So it is new, and what it is something that's targeting the employee experience as a whole, which is something that hasn't really had a lot of focus from an IT perspective in the past. So it's been a response to the pandemic, really. So Microsoft is saying, well, if we're now going to accelerate our transition to hybrid working, we need to ensure that we're still taking care of the employee experience in ways that we can't anymore. You know, it's not just about having donut Thursdays or free coffee in the kitchen anymore. We need to be making sure that we're providing the right tools and the right experience when they're distributed geographically around the world or whatever it may be. So there's lots of different modules to target lots of different aspects of the employee experience. So you've got Viva Learning to cover off the learning and developer side of things, and then Viva Topics to do knowledge management, Viva Goals to be able to better communicate your organizational objectives and cascade those down to the team so they can set their own goals at a departmental, team, or even individual level and see how they're all kind of working together. And then you've got Connections kind of pulling all of these together. So being able to serve content where it needs to be served, which in Microsoft's world, it's Teams. So pulling all of this into Teams and trying to make sure that employees are armed and equipped with everything they need to do their jobs and enjoy their jobs and feel satisfied with their jobs.
And I think it's important to note as well that some people, and I always thought this is a bit of a reaction from the back of the pandemic where Teams went through the roof in terms of its adoption rate. There were some of the elements of Viva that have always been there in the background, like Insights was actually called Workplace Analytics previously. And what Microsoft had done, and we saw an announcement yesterday, a lot of it is just rebadging. And so some of these things aren't necessarily new. So they're not brand new into the Viva, into the Microsoft suite. They've always been there, but they're just giving them a rebranding and a badging to say, actually, it's all part of this Viva platform or Viva employee experience platform. And the rebadging is really just saying, well, actually, this is how they all tie together as part of the Microsoft ecosystem, really. It's interconnected and the symbiosis of all those different apps that are already there. It's nothing like it's not a brand new thing to say, oh, this is brand new. It's not, it's unproven. Really, it's just a rebadging and a consolidation of apps into one suite. So things like you said, the learning, that's quite a new thing, but really that's off the back of LinkedIn. LinkedIn has always been there. Goals is actually another product that they've recently brought in, so that one is relatively new. But Insights, that's been there through Workplace Analytics and now just rebadging. What other things have we seen, like things to think about? Topics, is that something that's using a foundation layer from something that's already in existence?
I think so, yeah. And I think really the Viva brand as a whole, like you say, with the bringing aspects from components that were already there is just to bring them into a family that anything that impacts the employee experience. So it was a direction that I think it looked like Microsoft were heading in anyway, but they just hadn't stamped it and gone, right, this is all about employee experience. So topics, as you say, I think they already had Project Cortex going on before that with doing the AI-generated content and where Syntex came from as well. And I think that they were moving in that direction of using technology and AI to pick up some of those more sort of manual tasks of tagging things and serving content where we need it. And that was shown with the investments they were making and the companies that they were bringing in to the Microsoft family were showing their direction long before Viva was announced. I think that it was, as you mentioned, the pandemic accelerated that. So they've gone, okay, we thought this transition to hybrid working was going to be over 10 years. No, it's been done over 3 months. Now we need to quickly get there. And I'm sure I heard that, the Viva project started during the pandemic. So it was something that they, invested in heavily as a response. Even Microsoft, with all their power and might, were caught off guard.
Yeah. So I think trying to break these down a bit more. So we think about some of the elements within it. So you mentioned Connections, Engage as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Engage is and why I should care about that and how it ties in perhaps with Connections as well?
Yeah, so Viva Engage, it's powered by Yammer. So it's now no longer Yammer, actually, I think as of yesterday. So it's Yammer taking a new form, a new label. So it's another one that's had its badge changed to fit into the employee experience as a whole. It ties in quite nicely because it's there in many organizations. It's already being used. So now we can just tie that content more neatly into Teams and into the various feeds around. So you've got the company feed that you can put on your home site. There's now the Microsoft feed that's going to be in Outlook and Office.com, pulling that content together. And then now with the Connections home experience, you can have, your company feed showing there with Yammer conversations. So now you can take content that perhaps would have been an email or maybe even a Teams message and go, well, now people are getting more visibility of Yammer. We can put it where it should have been in the first place. And I think the big resistance in some customers to move to Yammer was, well, everyone's in Teams. So I might as well just put it in Teams because I know people are going to see it then. Now the same is true of Yammer, now Viva Engage.
So some of the typical questions that we get from our customers or people when they're asking us about what really is Viva, how can we break that down? Are there things that people need to be thinking about in order to prepare for Viva to be rolled out? And is Viva something that you just switch on and say, here it is, off we go, let's get up and running? How do we try to approach that switching on, if you like? What are the things that we can think about doing?
Well, I think the important thing actually is not thinking necessarily just about what have I got to do this. It's thinking about it in terms of what is Viva. Well, what it isn't is something that you have to have or you don't have. Because of all those different components, you can select which ones are right for your organization and accept that some of them aren't going to be, because whether it's not the right time or it's just not fit for how your organization works. So I think that the first step is thinking and accepting that I don't have to just decide now I'm going to have all of Viva or I'm going to reject it because I don't understand it. It's have a look at each module and think about what is right for my organization. What should I be looking at and putting onto my long-term digital strategy? And then work backwards from there and think about, okay, well, now what are the technical things I need to be doing to get there? But I think the first step is just think about how can I fit these modules? Because I don't think it's about whether Viva's right or wrong for me. It's just about deciding which modules are right for you. Because there will be some, and it might just be like the ones that you've probably already got there, Insights, Connections, and Engage, no further monetary investment, but you can just make sure that they're being consumed and they're adding the value that they have the potential to add. So start with those perhaps, and then look at the others and plot them onto your strategy and your roadmap and work backwards and then engage with a partner.
And I think that point that you mentioned there about you don't have to do everything all at once, because you have to look at, well, we're not going to get too technical here or too much into the weeds of the licensing model and things, but we want to make sure that you are getting the most out of the things that you have available to you. So maybe you do start with like connections and enable it. Yammer and Engage, as we're going to have to start calling it from now on, it's not for every organization. I think that's something that we've always kind of heard. It's like you have to think about what Microsoft used to call the inner loop, the outer loop, and those sorts of things. They're not terms we really hear too much anymore, actually, in terms of the inner loop and outer loop, in terms of how internal communications and external communications and broadcast communications are made. But I think the point that you're making around, like, you don't need to invest in buying the full Viva license straight off the bat. Start by the lower level building blocks of connections, is like your intranet enabling within Teams. Get people using Teams, get them into Teams to adopt that first, because that's where they're working, that's where conversations are happening. Engage and the badging that they did 6 months ago to bring Engage into Teams and make it available for communities to have conversations. That's probably a good next step if you're a big enough organization and diverse enough organization to have various communities of practice, perhaps, or your directorates, or however you might be structured. And then there's like you said, there's a progression to be made, progressing along from get those foundations laid. And I think if you've got an intranet today and you've got something set up on, a SharePoint intranet, how easy is it to switch that over and to make it available in Teams?
Yeah, I mean, it's too easy to ignore. It's almost going to be just happening automatically, and you'd have to disable it. So I think that those are definitely the quick wins that we should be looking at. And we have to think about the benefit, not just to what is the benefit to the direct benefit to the user from giving them Yammer to have those more social conversations. It's the indirect benefit of keeping those conversations out of Teams so that Teams can really be used for what it's used for, doing that peer-to-peer communication, project work-related topics. So I think that it's looking at what can be seen as a non-essential thing, which Yammer, I think, has fallen victim to that in the past. And all of Viva is in danger of being seen by, whether it's IT managers or internal comms teams, it's non-essential because it's an extra investment of time or resource. So it's saying, okay, well, it might not be essential, but these ones don't require as much investment, but I can still make sure that I'm getting the value that I'm already invested with Microsoft 365. So Viva Engage, I can start pulling those conversations out of Teams into Yammer. That's where they belong. And now I've improved the Teams experience as a result, because now I know that that's work chat. This is more common interest chat, and that what we used to call the outer loop. And actually, I heard a really good way of thinking about it, which is if you think about a community in Yammer, you want it to be as big as possible. You want as many people to join as possible because it's common interest. You want as many people to contribute to that conversation, where a team, you want it to be as small as possible. Don't add people that don't need to be there, because you're cluttering their activity feed and they're going to clutter the conversation unnecessarily if they don't need to be there. So that's a nice way of thinking about it, is if you've got massive teams, maybe it should be a Yammer community instead.
So I think
Viva Engage community.
Let's keep consistency with Engage as of yesterday.
I need an elastic band.
The progression. So we're thinking about like progression. So you've laid the foundations of enabling connections. You've got some communities of practice and some conversations going on, like broadcast communities in Engage. And then you've also got potentially a level up. What would be the next thing you'd be thinking about knowledge management and how you can actually have our customers. So one of the things I personally am thinking is, like, as a professional services organization and a Microsoft partner, our people, our expertise, they're our knowledge. We have Viva Engage and everything. We have the suite enabled in our organization, but we're not maximizing it enough. What kind of things can we do? Can we do as an organization, and our listeners perhaps do, to level up beyond the initial, I've turned on connections, I've got the intranet up and running, I'm building communities. What's the next thing that they might think about doing?
So I don't think there's going to be a one size fits all for anyone, because, in our organization and our industry, knowledge management is quite key, where that won't be true for everyone because just the nature of the work they're doing. So you might say, well, for some organizations, it's learning and development. We need to focus on that and invest in that. Or I think one actually, which is going to be more equal across any industry and sector, is the goals. So looking at how we can better communicate our corporate goals and make sure that everyone is aware of what their contribution is and how that adds value to the organization, no matter where you sit in the org chart. I think that's going to be the kind of the great equalizer across all industries and companies of all sizes. And I think that's one where I would be advising customers to be looking at goals, making sure it's somewhere on your roadmap. And then for all the other modules, it's just a case of working out, like I said earlier, which ones are right. And then if you want to level up beyond that initial pilot of, I call it a pilot, but you've dipped your toe in the water of Viva with Connections, Engage, and maybe started looking and playing with the others, turn it on. Invest some time maybe to run a short pilot on something like Topics. So don't just put your business case together, get the licenses, roll it out, because you really won't see the return. You won't see an accurate picture of what the value of that module is going to be. So I think that when you've chosen the next step, the next module that you want to play around with, I think look at what the steps are going to get you there and include things like, how are we going to communicate this? How are we going to train people? How are we going to make sure that this is adopted so that the investment is worthwhile? And really start to then think about doing a pilot with a small group of users, maybe even like 50 users for something like Topics, and get the feedback and learn from that experience. And then that will translate as well to the other modules. So how did we do it right? How did we do it wrong? And carry that forward.
I think as a Microsoft partner, we get a lot of content and we actually get a lot of support from Microsoft themselves. And I think this is where organizations and our customers can get the support from people like us as a partner.
Yeah.
And they can really come to us and say, how can we get the most value out of this suite of tools? How can we start a pilot? And like you said, if goals is the first place that somebody's going to go and look to, it really does align with an employee experience strategy. And and I think this is where our ethos of work happy comes into it as well. And I'd like to try and explore that a bit more with you around how you think that perhaps with our customers and people that we're engaging with, where work happy fits into that model of the employee experience platform and an overall strategy for organizations such as our customers.
Yeah, and I think that this is where the value is really realized, because I mentioned earlier that Viva is in danger of being seen as non-essential. And I think from an IT standpoint, there is an argument to be made for that. We've lived without it for this long. But I think what Work Happy has always been about within Silicon Reef and what we try to deliver for our customers is using technology to positively impact the day-to-day of the people. And I think that Viva is just another suite of tools that we've now got in our arsenal to use to deliver a better working experience and employee experience for the users. And I think that's it's useful for us. We're trying to deliver Work Happy, so naturally Viva is going to enter into that conversation every single time. If we want to be making sure that people are feeling valued, if we want to make sure that they're being heard, if we want to make sure that they're being communicated to and feel like their contributions are worthwhile, and making sure they're not wasting their time finding content when it could just be served by some fancy AI, all of those things are going to make people more productive. It's going to make them feel better about their day because they're adding the value rather than feeling lost and overwhelmed. That's Work Happy through and through. So I think we should call Viva the Work Happy platform.
We should actually rebranding coming your way, Microsoft. You did it for Engage. We're doing it for the whole platform. So thinking about employee experience as a kind of a concept in a platform. And again, I'm trying to look a bit further down the path of where Microsoft are going with this. And there's a couple of new modules. There's actually 3 new modules coming out. We've got Amplify, we've got Pulse, and then there's a sales module that's now rolled out as well. So the way my understanding is that Amplify and Pulse, they're really kind of an employee experience benefit. And if you think about the platform, you've got those 2 elements being bolted on to the existing areas. Then you've got sales, which is a lot more focused on a team. How do you think Microsoft are going to grow these kind of plug-in modules? Like, so you've got a sales one today. Mm-hmm. There might be an HR one next. What do you think, and where Microsoft are going, and why this is actually evolving into more of a broader platform than just, looking at data analytics and insights and learning? And is it at risk of potentially spiraling out of control? Like, there's too many modules and it becomes confusing. What are your thoughts on that?
I think so. And I teased this. I did a blog post on Viva Goals, and I think that was the 5th module that was org-wide, but it had followed sales. And I mentioned there that I really hope that Microsoft don't get carried away with the Viva ray gun, just rebranding everything Viva, because arguably with the employee experience, everything we use in our day is impacting my employee experience, all the way down to Microsoft Word. If Microsoft Word is not functioning and behaving how I want it to, it's giving a poor user experience. So I think that I hope they don't get too carried away with it. Sales is an interesting one because it was the first, I think they call it a role-specific module. So it was the first, and they've said it's not going to be the last. So there are definitely going to be other role-specific modules entering into the suite. And I think that for me, that did confuse things, and it made it harder to communicate to our customers when we'd been saying that Viva is all about the employee experience. So everything Viva is going to impact all of your employees. And that was a really solid business case where sales didn't have that. So it'd be interesting to see where they go next. I think that where the general shift is going to be where it's going to be high impact. So what are the areas of the business where they can benefit from having content served to them better and brought into teams? So, Viva Sales, bringing stuff into teams that the sales team can now use, high impact. If it means you're selling more, that's ultimately good for business. And then I think that the rest of the modules, I think, will just get more and more integrated, and they'll work better together. They'll get smarter. They'll get faster. They'll just generally get bedded into Microsoft 365. So no matter what you're doing, all the way down to what we're seeing now, you're writing an email and Viva is there going, do you want this? And I think we'll just see more of that. But customers need to be ready.
Yeah, and I think going back to the point you said earlier on, you don't have to switch all of these things on. You can do it module by module. You don't have to roll out a big plan to say, right, we're going to turn on everything. Thinking about how people will actually be able to monitor the usage. How would somebody go about doing that? How can the information that Microsoft in maybe it's a setting or reports can provide us to say, are we getting the most out of these tools? Are we adopting these things well enough? What does that look like?
So I saw recently, actually, there's a new dashboard coming for Viva Topics specifically, which will show, I think it's going to be served through the topic center, where you can see like the health of your topics and get some analytics and feedback on topics. And I think that we will see more of Viva specific analytics, where what we're really doing today is we're using the usage and adoption scores and dashboards. And we're using Viva to try and positively impact those. So it might be things like we're trying to reduce emails or things like that, email attachments. So maybe if we have Viva Connections with Engage and we're creating those other comms channels and making them more accessible, then we should see a slight reduction in email throughput and things like that. So internal email specifically. And I think that I would definitely be using the usage reports, the adoption dashboard, and things like that to be measuring the impact that we're having. And I'm sure we will see more and more specific dashboards for the Viva modules on what is the usage, because I don't think there's one for Viva Learning at the moment, but it's there a lot in LinkedIn Learning. So I think those sorts of things will be transitioning down in terms of content popularity and things like that. And we should be using that to be evolving the deployment, even once we've gone live. Okay, it's not being used, maybe we need to do something else, or we need to enable something.
And is this where change management and making sure that your pilot group are fully engaged and enabled, and senior stakeholders as well kind of bought into why we're doing this as an organization?
Absolutely. And I think it's beyond the pilot, it's having that continual opportunity for feedback, because organizations change. So what you do 1 year or 1 month even might be right then, but it's not right when your organization changes. The people change, not just the organizational priorities. Within 3 years or 2 years, you could have 50% of your workforce that weren't there when you rolled it out. And we need to be making sure that we're getting continual feedback on how it's being used and how it could better be used. And that's not just for Viva. That's something that we've been doing for SharePoint, for Teams, and for all of the other workloads and services, to make sure that we are constantly delivering the right thing. We don't have the opportunity that we had in the days of old of migrating from old to new. That was our opportunity to reset and make sure that we're delivering the right thing. We don't do that anymore. We're on the platform forever now. That's what Microsoft are trying to build, our forever home. So we need to be making sure that we don't lose that opportunity to revise how we've deployed it, how we've configured it, and using all of the analytics to guide us and inform us in what we should be looking at.
Martin, I've heard that there are lots of updates coming all the time for Viva. Microsoft push these updates all the time. Connections has had a fairly significant makeover, if you like. And I've even heard the term, it's the death of the intranet. How is that coming, and is that a reality? What does it look like? What's this update that I'm hearing that's happened?
Yeah, the volume of updates is a sign that they released it before it was ready, shall we say. So I think that this is one of them. So the new home experience in Connections, I don't think it's the death of the intranet. I think that because it defaults the experience where the intranet once existed in Teams, so now your intranet is being hidden away behind this screen. I think that
because it always used to be in the top left corner in Teams. Once you'd enable Connections, you could click on it, it would take you to your homepage, right? What's there now?
So there's this new kind of landing page where you've got your feed, you can have a banner, you've got your dashboard. So all of the Viva Connections elements are being pulled together, where we were adding them to the intranet homepage before that. And when you enabled Connections, your intranet was shown in Teams and you could access those elements there. Now you can access them without going to the intranet homepage. So that's where, people questioning whether it takes from the intranet. And I think that two things. One, you can switch that around so that the default is still your intranet. If you've invested in your home site, then you want to switch that back round, because it's probably adding a lot more for the user than just those three components. And I think that it's complementary to the intranet. So you can have it there. And that's why Microsoft have said, right, if you want to have this experience, you've got quick access to your feed and your resources and your dashboard, but you can still link through to your intranet. So they're saying this isn't a replacement.
Okay.
This is a almost first layer. And then if you need all of your your more corporate policies and things like that are being surfaced, or anything else that you've got on your home site, you can still navigate through to that. So death of the intranet, I don't think so. I think that that's potentially ambitious in terms of Microsoft are pushing Viva at a pace that I don't think many organizations can keep up with. And I think moving away from having a corporate intranet that's been there for 50 years, from a notice board in the corridor all the way through to SharePoint 2003 onwards, just killing it with the home experience, I don't think is the case.
Okay. So if anything, it's they're trying to do it as a productivity enabler to allow you as a launch pad off to the other Viva apps that are employee experience apps. But you're saying you can turn it off. Like if I'm a well-established organization and the intranet news that cascades down from my internal comms team is important to me and my organization, and we've invested a lot of time and effort in building that out and structuring it, we're happy with it, I can turn off that homepage experience in Teams or Viva Home.
Yeah, well, you can just switch the default so that it will show your intranet. If you are an organization that's already invested heavily in your home site, then absolutely do that. But I think having the home experience there, it makes it accessible for people that haven't made that investment or can't make that investment. So now you can roll out connections and start using those components without having your home site there. So I think it's a middle ground for those organizations to make connections more accessible to everyone so they can start reaping the benefits from it without working their way backwards on the technical prerequisites and going, okay, well, now we've got to spend the next 12 months rebuilding our intranet before we can enable connections. No, you can enable connections and then look at building your intranet out to serve the content that isn't being served by the new connections experience. So it just makes it more accessible. And I think that's why I see it as a value add, a layer on top, not a replacement. It may well become that. We don't know, but it's not right now.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that, because I think that was something that's been a concern for a lot of people that we've spoken to around where's my intranet going to go?
Yes.
And it's not going anywhere.
No, it's the death of the intranet. Okay. We can put that term to bed now.
Okay, good. Thanks, Martin, for talking us through what Viva is and trying to demystify some of the elements of it. We've covered off what the different segments are, the different elements of Viva, and we've talked about some of the new things that are coming as well in terms of Amplify and Pulse, and they're really employee experience applications. If there's a top 3 things that you would like our listeners to take away today, what would they be around Viva and demystifying it and perhaps how you would roll it out?
So I think where we started off talking about what Viva is and what Viva isn't, what it isn't is a single entity of turn it on and reap a load of benefits. It's a suite of tools. So I think tip number 1 would just be, don't be intimidated by the Viva suite. Break it down. Look at each module. Don't ask the question of, do I need this or why do I need this? Think about which modules can I benefit from and ignore the others, and be okay with ignoring the others. Don't even question it. Just think, I can make use of these ones, therefore that's where I'm going to focus my energy. And I think that helps take some of that pressure off of internal comms teams, HR, who are going to have invested interest in the employee experience, but also IT teams. We're all having to work together now to get these things implemented. Looking at Viva as a whole, it's too big of a task. Break it down, plot it out on your roadmap, and think about which ones should we do first and start there.
Is that where a Microsoft partner can really help to roadmap those things and to look at how you would align it to your employee experience?
Absolutely. And they're the conversations that we're having with our customers a lot now. It's thinking about when they come to us and ask what Viva is, we can point them at the Microsoft literature around that. There's plenty of it. There's videos and blogs. So it's more about answering what Viva means for them. And it is, using whiteboarding tools to map it out and say, right, you're here today. You've got maybe an intranet you might not have. So plotting it out and looking at the rest of their digital strategies. So if they're rolling out other systems, whether it be like HR or whatever, how we can time the release of a Viva module to really add value. Because one thing, thinking from a change in adoption perspective, we can't push Viva out to the users when something else has just changed. You're gonna negatively impact your adoption through change fatigue and things like that. So think about it holistically. Most of these modules will impact all of your employees. So we need to be thinking about it carefully rather than as one big lump and we throw it out in one go.
And what would your second tip be?
Don't just turn it on and hope for the best. Again, so the conversations that we're having, and I would recommend engaging with a Microsoft partner to have a look at what you have to do to lay the foundations for this to really make it stick. Because for something like topics, for example, it's not only a monetary investment, but genuinely, if you turn it on and don't do anything with it, it really won't get used and it won't add any value. And you can end up with it going away, trawling and coming back with 30,000 or more topics because you haven't planned, you haven't done your information architecture, you haven't engaged with the right people. So I think that definitely don't just invest, walk away and then be upset when it doesn't give you the return and then look at taking it back. I think that we need to be thinking about it in advance, planning it out and saying, okay, this is one we want to look at, but we're not going to do it now. And be okay with that and just say, right, for now, all I need to do is start doing some communications, or I need to start just engaging with a small population of people that might become my champions and speaking to them and asking them whether they think it would be a good idea even. So you can just do some surveying and get the lay of the land. Don't rush into it and don't just force it out there.
And does that lead us on to your third tip, the fact that you just mentioned about planning it, adoption, champions?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that my third tip would be pilot it. So when you've engaged with that population and you've had your feedback, involve them in how we should be using it as an organization, and then try it. But try it in, with that small community so that you can make sure you get it right before you push it out to the rest of your people. It's harder to take things back, and it's harder to reconfigure things when it's been done poorly because the message has been sent and it hasn't landed. So I think that controlling that with a friendly bunch of your people, getting that honest feedback, get it wrong, and then roll it out. So especially with something like topics or Viva Learning, it's about, you can really target that to a specific community before you roll it out, and you're not fully invested at that point. So you can even at that point disprove it and say, we don't need this. This isn't going to work for us. And you haven't invested in licensing all of your users for it. So you can start small, prove the return, prove that it's going to work, and then do it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Martin, for telling us all about Viva today and how it aligns with Work Happy and your experience of working with our customers as well. Really look forward to seeing you on the next show where we talk a bit more deeply about how we're going to maximize the value and do more with less.
Look forward to it.
Thanks, Martin.
Cheers.